He also has the guide of his Pluto here because his Mars was trine. Let me erase that for a second here. Mars was trine to his Pluto. But of course, it's a little later realization. Pluto is in retrograde here. You can see that, right? Pluto was in retrograde. So that means that, if you can't see that, it's right there. Pluto was in retrograde. So that means that had to he had to process all that internally first and say, oh, what does Pluto mean? How do I regenerate? How do I learn from this any sort of like feeling powerful or feeling even powerless? How do I learn from those gifts and saying, what do I need to go through? So he's had to question a lot of the power struggles within himself and saying it's more internalized rather than power struggles with other people. So maybe his anger was also an issue, but because it's in trine, he was able to process that. Trine is a comfortable aspect. However, remember, trine is, even though it is a comfortable, harmonious aspect, any sort of unexpected things, any sort of like when we become too comfortable, when it becomes too harmonious, something different comes in, and all of a sudden, right, it gets shocked, and we don't know what to do with it yet. And then, but because of the trine, he's able to actually manage that. You can say that he's able to later internalize what power anger means for him, specifically pertaining to second house issues with 10th house. So material or possessive or worth, self-worth pertaining to reputation. So his worth in terms of the public, in terms of like how he presents himself, or how the world sees him as a figure, especially as an actor or a comedian, both, right? So he's able to process all that. But Pluto comes in much later, especially with Pluto in Virgo there. Pluto in Virgo is a genuine approach to work, to servitude, to perfection. What is real perfection? Is it really perfection, or is it not? Letting go of that. So Pluto comes in. People who are born with Pluto, the generation of Pluto Virgonians, they would tend to see work as not for the sake of work. It's work for the sake of what is real servitude, what is real work, what is how am I helping people, how is the workplace supposed to be? It's not unconscious, it's actually conscious behavior. But in retrograde, of course, there's a delay there. So it's more internalized and not power struggles with anyone. So in any case, we go back to Saturn here. We go back to Saturn and say that his ego is definitely processed. He had to go through the process of it's not like Pluto, where Pluto unveils truth and keeps peeling at it. It's a painful experience. But Saturn is more like, maybe you need to learn from hard work in terms of how you build your ego for yourself. How do you build your own reputation for yourself? With Saturn there, it's the teacher in us. It's the wise man saying, I've gone through this, and you should go through this as well. So it's still a little more earthly, it's a little more, I don't want to say plain, but I don't know. My experience with Saturn is having the limitations always there, but realizing that the limitations have purpose still. It's saying that before you jump off the bridge, it's making sure it's not only is it safe, but is it wise, right? Because Saturn also relates to karmic cycles. So if you don't do the right thing, so to speak, if you don't follow your basics, if you don't sort of figure out first where you are, your foundations, figure out where you are from there, how can you go up? How do you know how to fly without building anything? That's Saturn. You need to make something out of something first, materialize it first, and then apply it, right? And then actually go out there. So the other thing I wanted to add here was that because his sun was in 26 degrees Capricorn. I learned this, that when it comes to decans or something like that, that because it's in 26 degrees Capricorn, Saturn doesn't actually fully affect his sun self, like his identity, what gives him vitality. It is actually uh, Virgo. So it's Mercury. So it's a lot to do with being a bit more communicative. He's able to self-expression, basically, right? So identity, self-expression, expression of oneself, where one belongs, because it's all about also reputation, and all that stuff. So, and we look into Capricorn rules his third house here. So that means lots of limitations, of course, a lot of like processing, a lot of more, I guess you can say, distancing and not aloofness, but like it's the hermit sort of thing. It's like sort of like, let me process this by myself first. Independence, right? That's very Capricorn. But we also know that Capricorn rules the 10th house. So it extends over. So his sun is in Saturn, was in the third house, and Capricorn rules that, so you don't need to go elsewhere. It usually stays within that area. His way he communicates the things he learns about in life in general. But it also extends out to the 10th house, naturally his career. Not only because of this trine right here, because of Pluto trine is Mars, but that's just Mars, but most likely because it is the 10th house. The original natural ruler of the 10th house is Capricorn. So we look into the 10th house and seeing where all that stuff is, right? But we're not going into that. We're just focusing on wisdom stuff here, right? But we still have to look at the bigger picture. So we see that Saturn was in Uranus. Saturn was in, I'm jumping ahead here. Saturn was in Aquarius. If we looked at Saturn itself, and disregarding any aspects, just Saturn itself, we look at what sign it was in, so Aquarius. So we have to look into Uranus. Where was Uranus? Uranus was its 10th house. It actually kind of directly applies because there's a connection to it. So that means that Uranus rules his Saturn. That means that because Uranus was in 29 degrees Leo, look at that, 29 degrees Leo, there's a fieriness about it. So what that means for Uranus is like maybe some sort of impatience. That's kind of nervous energy. That's Uranus. Sudden changes, right? Volatility, sudden changes, the weird things that we do. But it's in retrograde again, more retrograde. So he's able to process this, the sort of, I guess you could say, that's where probably it's another form of wisdom, because if we look at retrograde stuff, I'm going to cheat here again. Because I'm still learning about retrograde. I'm still trying to understand it. So it's a moment of social awkwardness and finds acceptance and relief with it. So yeah, so naturally, so processing that unusualness, this weirdness, sort of when it's very Uranus, it's nervousness as well, right? Because Uranus rules the nervous system. At least that's what I know. And because it was in Leo, so his Saturn has a bit of fiery undertone to it. Saturn has a bit of fire undertone to it. It's not just Aquarius. So any sort of limitations he might have experiences, Saturn extends that out to a little more fire and airy sort of undertone. Well, first air, and then also airy. So has a lot to do with, I guess, management, or rather like being a leader, or being able to, how do I explain this one? Saturn in Leo, or Saturn in Aquarius, first of all, is always pertaining to limits of, limits in, I guess you can say, limits in innovation, limits in that kind of stuff. So it's, even though he has all these abilities, like to be innovative, to be smart, not intellectual, sort of all that science stuff, all that intellectuality, his IQ, all that stuff, that's like very Aquarius. I'm going to support this with a few words here. Okay, here we go. So independence, so there's limitations for independence in communication, limitations for tolerance, individualism, progression, of course, limitations for logic, so it's not too much logic, it's just kind of grounded, and also limitations in intellect, like I said, intellect, and also altruism. So altruism being, in this case, being able to extend and see what's beyond myself. It's not about me, it's about us. So, but because Saturn is there, it kind of, but with the fiery undertone of Leo, we had